Well, I'm sure you all know the famous story of the Greek mathematician Archimedes and how he came up with his eureka moment. He was close friends with the King Hero, who had this problem. He had commissioned a crown to be made of gold, and he'd given the craftsman this weight of gold to be turned into a crown. But the problem was the king didn't trust this craftsman. He finished the crown, it weighed the right amount, but had the craftsman really used all the gold, or had he kept some for himself and substituted a cheaper material in this crown? So how was this king going to find out? How could the king test the crown's composition and integrity without destroying it? Over to Archimedes. And for a long time, Archimedes was stumped by this problem, just couldn't figure out how he was going to find out if this crown was pure gold or not. And so he decided to take a bath, go and clear his head. He'd filled the bathtub up right full to the brim, and when he went down into the water water overflowed and gushed out. And here was the answer for Archimedes. Your own body's volume will displace the exact amount in water. And once Archimedes figured out that the volume and the weight of the crown would help him calculate the density, that would help him determine whether it was pure gold or not. Eureka, he cried out. Eureka, and so the story goes, he jumped out of his bathtub, ran through Syracuse naked, and the rest is history. It's also obvious, isn't it, in hindsight today? This is how you test composition, integrity of a substance. But when you come to human beings to test their composition, to test their integrity, it's just not so easy as a bathtub full of water. Sure, it's not. Because you see, a person only reveals to another what they want them to see. You don't see the invisible things. You don't see the invisible weights that a person has on their back. You know those weights, the burden of grief, that every time you're celebrating a moment of joy, there's the sting of pain and sadness accompanying it. The burden of shame, a young person who's lost their virginity way too soon and they're still carrying the shame of regret. The pain of failure, that exam result that was so bad it entirely altered the direction of life. The circumstances in your family that made you grow up way too soon to become the responsible one. Oh, if only it were that easy to throw a person in a bath and identify what is the pure self and what are the things that you're carrying that are unnecessary. In many ways, the pandemic has caused people to withdraw and do a bit of this self-work on their lives. Like the chef I was reading about from Dublin this week, who took up running as a hobby during the pandemic, started with the Couch to 5K app, then built it up to the 45-minute run, then completed the virtual half marathon, lost 5 stone in the process, and realized as he was running that his life was stuck in a rut. He didn't really want to be a chef anymore, so he retrained and became a driving instructor. And the thing was that running gave him this space to figure this out, to investigate his true nature, to go off on a different track. But for many of us, the pandemic has uncovered these deep feelings we've been carrying in our invisible backpack that are weighing us down, that make us stuck, that cause us pain. And for some, yes, this has triggered a move towards authentic living, and that's great. But for most of us, the pain of discovery is soothed by numbing activities. endless social media scrolling, binge watching, self-harm, addiction to exercise, to food, to alcohol, 1,000 different ways to eat our pain. And the invisible backpack gets stuffed so that when you're sitting with your friends having a good time, there's that glazed look across your face. I'm here, but I'm not really here, because the pain means I can't be present to you. I wonder what invisible burdens King Belshazzar was having when he had that party. This party to end all parties. Now, normally at state banquets, the king would have the party with the elite behind closed doors, invisibly, while the plebs partied together. But not anymore. This was the blowout party that King Belshazzar was having. And Belshazzar was drinking, numbing his pain. Did he know that the Persians and Medes were coming? They were approaching. A coup d'etat to be launched that very night. Did he know they were crouching at his door? Was he blocking out the fear, the paralyzing anxiety of how to be better organized as a leader? Better drink and forget it all. But while he was drinking, he came up with this new idea. Let's bring out the gold and silver goblets that my father took from the Jerusalem temple. And let's use them. Let's everybody use them, the nobles, the wives, the concubines. It doesn't matter anymore. And so they drank, and they praised the gods of silver and gold, convincing themselves, or at least trying to convince themselves, that the golden age of Babylon had come. When in fact, the writing was to be soon on the wall, quite literally. And there's this interesting father-son dynamic going on here. Nebuchadnezzar, we were talking last week about Nebuchadnezzar, how there's a little Nebuchadnezzar in all of us. During the week, the staff came up with a song. You've been hearing new songs today, but the staff added a verse to I've got that joy, joy, joy down in my heart. And the verse goes like this. I've got that little Nebuchadnezzar, little Nebuchadnezzar, little Nebuchadnezzar down in my heart. Where? We'll not copyright that. I don't think it'll catch on. But Nebuchadnezzar was this king who destroyed cities, who captured exiles, who built wonders, the wonders of Babylon. He did many great things. He had epiphanies of the true living God. And then there's Belshazzar, the descendant. And what is Belshazzar doing? He hadn't done any of these things. He's simply drinking. Did he wonder, how can I top my father? How can I exceed my father's achievements? The pressure on his back. And perhaps it's in that place he ponders, well, at least I can do a show trick at this party. At least I can showman my dominance. These holy utensils that my father daren't touch, let's take them out. Do you see the desperate one-upmanship going on here? I can't be better than my parents, so let me push the boundary. Let me blur the boundary. And the narrator all the while in Daniel 5 brings gravity to what Belshazzar has done by adding this phrase. They brought in the golden goblets that had been taken from the temple of God. The temple of God. But Belshazzar wasn't just abusing the property of slaves. He was stealing from God. His anxiety made him exert a control over people and cultures he was never authorized to do. But we do the same today, don't we? My friend Martha, who I knew in Kenya, and we were in Daystar University together, she's of Indian origin, but spent much of her life growing up in Kenya, and she wrote this telling phrase this week. As we continue to reflect on Black history, let us consider the ways empire via American chattel slavery, Western imperialism, and settler colonization has severely colonized our sense of time. Black and brown cultures in the South view time as polychronic versus monochronic, as circular versus linear. Hence, the propensity to frame time as people-oriented versus event-oriented. In the global South, time is the treasure where we prize people over events and products. That really resonated with me. It reminds me of the time I practiced music with the girls in the BES community, and I feel this tension where I'm trying to do linear time, trying to turn up on time, trying to get things done, trying to squeeze too much out of the day. And the girls come in and they're relaxed, they're laughing, they're carefree, they want to build relationships. And soon they have me laughing too, and it frees up my tight Western self. We all need that, where we're not trying to control other cultures and taking away the treasure. When we feel anxious and insecure, it's so easy, isn't it, to exert control. And that takes away the sanctity and sacredness of life. Belshazzar did this. His invisible fears of enemy lines approaching, of not measuring up to his father, and maybe so much more in that invisible backpack he was carrying. And all these invisible fears are brought out to the surface by the action of a visible hand writing on the wall. A visible hand writing in a language that's undecipherable. And all the buried emotions, numbed by drink and charade, now pour out of him. It says his face turned pale, his knees knocked, his legs gave way. And all of this is a euphemism because in the Hebrew and Aramaic, the version says his loins unknotted. In other words, his bowels loosened. Belshazzar lost his dignity that day. His out-of-control reactions were mirroring the lack of control he felt in reality. God did a Tower of Babel on him, writing confusing languages in order to help him realize he's not in control. And the tremendous irony in this story is that the very exiles Belshazzar tries to control and dominate become the only people who can interpret the writing. There's a beautiful play on words. The queen moves forward, this stabilizing influence in Belshazzar's life. And yet the very way in which she appears unbidden heightens the ineptitude of the king. But she notices Belshazzar's unknotted bowels and says, I know someone who can unknot your problems. A beautiful play on language. That person's Daniel. And for this entire book to be called Daniel, it's striking just how little word count is given to the prophet. But maybe that's the point. Because in many ways, Daniel's life is as much out of control as Belshazzar's life. He's now old. He's in his late 70s or maybe even 80s. By that stage of life, we all think life will be easier, won't it? We can slow down, we can retire, we can go traveling, we can take up new hobbies, but often the reality is we don't get there because of sickness, because of debt, because of family concerns. And all this time, Daniel was still in exile, not in control of his life. His life was not his own, but my goodness, Daniel was alive. Daniel was sharp. As Belshazzar said, the Spirit of God is in you. You have insight. You're able to illuminate from God. You have supernatural intuition. Daniel could unknot problems, solve enigmas. Someone so secure, someone so grounded, he didn't need center stage or the riches of the king to perform tasks. He simply moves to the rhythm of God. Belshazzar's own intelligence systems was to numb the danger, to push down the anxiety. Daniel's intelligence system was alive. Not because he was living in the way that he wanted to or in the world that he wanted to, not because he was on the ladder of success or financial security, but because his true worth and identity relied in the God-given gifts that had been given to him. And so Daniel interprets. He interprets on two levels, not just the words on the page or the wall in front of him, but he interprets the heart. What's going on in that invisible backpack in Belshazzar's heart? I don't know if any of you know your Enneagram number and how the place of your greatest weakness is also the place of your strength. Someone who's idealistic and optimistic can turn into a perfectionist and self-criticism. Someone who loves to help can become clingy and needy. Someone who excels at learning can be perceived as cold. Someone who's spontaneously energetic can grow impulsively bored. Daniel describes how Nebuchadnezzar's greatest strengths, his ability to have this bold multicultural empire, to create an empire, a world of wonders, all these things, this strong leadership, it became blind. Because Nebuchadnezzar forgot where his true authority came from, and so his greatest strength was turned into his greatest weakness, and he fell. And Daniel tells Belshazzar, this is the soil from which you were born. This is the context in which you're living your life. You've been trying to exceed your father's expectations when in reality you're a mere shadow of it. And in verse 22 and 23, he just verb pummels Belshazzar. You knew this. You set yourself up. You brought goblets from the temple. You drank. But you didn't honor the God who holds your life in his hands. And as Daniel holds these words, the three weights, many tekel farsin, a mina, a shekel, and a half. God has been weighing up, holding the character of the king who was trying to compete with his dead father, the one who'd given him power and authority in the first place. He didn't earn it. And yet Daniel exposes the weight, trying to outperform his dad, and these weights will eventually break the king and divide the kingdom. As Daniel interprets the words, Belshazzar's past and present and future all collide. And that same night, Belshazzar is killed, and that's all we get of this king. No more explanation needed. The interesting thing about this story of the visible hand is that it's bookended by two other stories of the visible hand. The first is of the writing on the stone tablets. You remember how God's hand wrote the commandments when Moses was up on the mountain? Those commandments telling us this is the best way to live. This is how to do life well. But the second story is very different. By the time you get to the New Testament, the teachers of the law in John chapter 8, they bring this woman who's caught in adultery to Jesus. And they say, you know, Jesus, in Moses' law, anyone caught in adultery is going to be stoned. What are you going to do? And the teachers were trying to trap Jesus. And so Jesus steps down, he stoops down, he takes his finger and he writes in the sand. And it takes us immediately back to that hand that created the law in the first place. Because Jesus is saying the ultimate judge is here. Only the sinless person can throw that stone. Is it you? There's a Belshazzar in all of us trying to hold life together, but hiding the invisible backpack. And our fears and anxieties take away the sacred life of others, but Jesus knows and sees right into the heart of the hidden pain, all those scars, the self-numbing strategies we imbibe, and yet Jesus does not judge. Because Jesus hasn't given any of us a Belshazzar death. Instead, he invites us to a banquet, not a Belshazzar banquet where you can drown your sorrows, but this banquet where he gives us a cup, his own cup, and says, take it. Here's life. And when we return to in-person worship, hopefully soon we'll be standing in a circle, passing the bread and the cup to each other, where there's no judgment at this banquet, because we all stand knowing each one of us carries painful, invisible, heavy rucksacks to this table. And we'll realize that the person beside us also has been using silly self-numbing strategies of endless scrolling. We've all been doing it. But there's grace. Because the one, Jesus Christ, who could have judged us and gave us the sentence of death, doesn't. He gives us life. Yes, there's a Belshazzar in all of us, but there's a Daniel in all of us. God-given gifts, God-given abilities for this present moment to interpret signs, to live well in the midst of a life we just can't control. And so Jesus today offers this cup and says, come, bring your burdens, come feast with me. Be present to all that I want to give you. Uncover all those invisible parts. Lay them down here. And instead, I'll cover you with the love that's mine to give, the love of Jesus, so that when you leave this place, people see Jesus in you. Come to the table. Know this love. No more Belshazzar, invisible pain. Come and be free. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.